Both managers got it wrong, which we'll talk about. Barcelona lost Pedri. That's a huge storyline, but fair play to Manchester United. They at least gave the kind of effort required to make this a fitting fixture for two of Europe's best over the last 2 months. And I say at least they gave the effort for it because if we're being honest, for those, maybe it's the neutrals who said this was a well-played game or it was up and down and that's what makes it fun. I'm not really so sure about that. I think there were a lot of sloppy mistakes and errors from players that over the last 2 months, as I mentioned, both these teams in great form, we haven't really seen such sloppy performances from a ton of these different players. And that chaos is what leaves a bad taste in my mouth for what we just watched. So let's get into it. Here are the 5 headlines from Barcelona's 2-2 draw with Manchester United at home in the first leg of their Europa League tie. And I usually don't bother you, but just before we get to the 5 headlines, I do want to ask a big help. If it's not too much trouble, if you can subscribe to the channel, again, that would be a big help because if you hadn't noticed, we really don't get sponsors on these videos. Maybe it's because I get a little knock the other night in the face during pickup. Maybe it's because this game put me in a little bit of a funk. But I want to be honest with everybody and say that because of the lack of sponsors for this YouTube channel, it kind of just winds up being me getting yelled at on the internet for free after these matches, which I don't really love. So if you've been watching at any point over the last 4 years, it would be a big help to subscribe to the channel to make sure I get some more eyes on this content, both regular Kool-Aids and watchers and sponsors alike. All right, now time for those headlines. One is Xavi's choices. This is going to be the big headline out of this match. And I felt like these 5 headlines, as much as I wanted to sneak some other stuff in there, I felt like they did kind of write themselves, beginning with that opening lineup. You know those moments when you're on social media and you see the lineup card and you go, well, that's an interesting one and that's going to define this game for good or bad. Because if this result was different and Barca won 4-0, well, we'd be giving high praise to Alba and Alonso saying it all worked out for Xavi. But I guess because people were expecting that it wouldn't with those kind of choices, well, that's what we're talking about, the very questionable decision that Xavi made. He admitted, we want to rotate, and with Cadiz coming up on the weekend, that was a calculation, that it seems like Barcelona and the club and Xavi, and you could actually argue that Erik ten Hag and his back line kind of did the same thing. Their rotation was quite surprising, not to put Harry Maguire out there at all in that starting lineup and having Luke Shaw next to Malacia. So, yeah, I mean, there were questions on both sides, I think, with these 11s. And for Barcelona, unfortunately, the depth, as we talk about with that back line, there's a much bigger drop-off for them than it is for the Red Devils. And I do want to try to step in Xavi's mind just for a second with this lineup. I think he expected a mid-block and De Jong to drop in as a third center-back, which he did, with Alonso going to the left and Alba getting forward. And there is some sound reasoning why you'd want the left foot of Alonso on that left side in build-up. Or at least you can live with it as you rotate that back line in different competitions, which is what his argument was. And I know it's going to sound crazy, but I want to defend Xavi a little bit about prioritizing, if you will, La Liga over Europe in this sense. I know that there's the Europa League money that in theory would be waiting for Barcelona if they were able to capture this trophy. But going 11 points up at the time and now 8 points in the Liga, that might be more important than succeeding in Europe. I do find talking to Kool-Aids that winning in the Europa League as a stand-in for European competition resonates more with international fans than it does on Spain, especially a lot of watchers of this channel. So I totally understand why a lot of people in my comments are going to be disagreeing with me. Because I do find, just on average, that those in Catalonia do prioritize the Liga, not more than European competition. Certainly they want Champions League over the Liga, but they still do put a lot of emphasis on the domestic league. And I think sometimes, and I do the same thing when I'm trying to create content, especially in English, that I do tend to devalue the Spanish league just a bit. Because you're constantly hearing, especially from English-speaking media, about how the Spanish league is corrupt and bankrupt, and the scandal with Barcelona, even yesterday with the referees, constantly fuels that fire, that there's a duopoly in Spain and that the talent at the top, as we know, is just getting bought out anyway, so who cares about La Liga? That all said, I do agree with you. Alba and Alonso, maybe Christensen and Balde, there was some kind of fitness that Xavi was worried about, but if they could have played on the weekend and could have played today, and not played against Cadiz, where you start Alonso and Alba, I don't know why Xavi didn't do that. I'm 100% with you. I would prioritize, as I did, this match over Cadiz. You have to trust your squad against Cadiz more than you can trust your squad in Europe, which is what Xavi's going to now have to do because it was a calamity of kind of worst case scenarios when it came to the lineup. 2 is find the space. The key to this game, when we spoke about it in the tactical previews, was all about figuring out where those spaces were going to be and how both teams could put their players that they needed to put in advantageous positions in those positions. And this game kind of wound up being everything happening down Barcelona's left and Manchester United's right. In this game, United were actually the ones on the road to deliver the first call that needed a response, and Araujo in the right side of that Barca backline answered. United was looking to get Bruno Fernandes onto the right in behind Alba and Alonso. And the one difference on the predictions that we made is that Rashford was in the center and Sancho was on the left instead of the right. And Weghorst was basically playing as an attacking midfielder in what was a formation that we kind of could have expected, especially when that being Manchester United were in possession, that it'd be a 4-1-4-1, and that is a bit of what we saw, with the exception being it's not Weghorst as the one, but it was Rashford. Fortunately for Barcelona, as has been the case so much this year, why the argument of Lewandowski, Pedri, Ter Stegen, who's the MVP of this season? Ter Stegen certainly is in that conversation and continues to be. I know he had that near post goal that winds up going in, and people can criticize him for that, but Barcelona are down 1-0 in this game, if not for him. The 28th minute save, the 34th minute save. Ter Stegen, thankfully, was on the top of his game in Europe. And going back to the starting lineup, you do understand why Xavi believed against that mid-block that Alba, with his crossing ability, might have been more dangerous. And there's an argument that he was. We saw the good and the bad, as is usually always the case, especially in Europe with Alba. You saw the good and the bad from the squirrel today. There was space on his side, so he had to be a key figure. He winds up, out of frustration, getting that yellow in the first half, which is truly, really frustrating. But then you have a question, did he win the penalty in the first half off of Wan-Bissaka? Maybe. Obviously, they didn't give it, but I think there was a fair argument to be had about another European night where Barcelona aren't necessarily getting the calls that they might have thought they would have got. But unfortunately, I do walk away with this game saying, because of the lack of crosses from Alba of high quality, well, then Balde, as he showed in the last 30 minutes, could have been more dangerous in those spots. 3 is Pedri injured. This is unfortunately going to be a long-standing headline that I might have to keep going back to throughout the coming weeks in case it winds up being as glaring an omission as it looks like it's going to be. Pedri getting hurt in this game, coming out for Roberto in the 42nd minute, hamstring injury. First time, it was time to defend, by the way. Roberto gave the ball back instead of turning into open space the way Pedri might have and likely would have done. So just focusing on this game and not looking too far ahead to the next 4 to 5 weeks. But even just in that moment, immediately you say, that's what Pedri could have done for you, and that's what Roberto doesn't do for you. Because ball retention without Pedri or Busquets, yeah, good luck in this game. Erik ten Hag, I don't think his team controlled this match like he said they did, but certainly once Pedri was out of this game, Manchester United and Barcelona, it was 50-50 as to who was going to actually use the ball for any good use. And obviously that means for the second leg, after Xavi, wearing number 30 again in Europe, picked up his yellow, that means no Dembele, no Pedri, and no Xavi in that second leg next week, which we're going to break down what Xavi and all that can do about that, but I just want to focus on the fact that this is going to be remembered as the match where Barcelona's injury luck in Europe, it had already run out. I felt like this season, it had already run out, but of course it's Europe, so players are going to get hurt. Headline 4 is 10 minutes turned upside down. As crazy and up and down as it was in that first half, it was still 0-0 after 45 minutes. But of course, everything becomes uncorked in the second half. Actually, it started before even that goal was scored by Alonso. That Rafinha shot was just inches away from, I don't think De Gea had it, I don't think he saw it, and Rafinha could have found the back of the net with that high pressure from Barcelona, and good on them as well. I know that Pedri, that injury could have shell-shocked them, but they came into the second half with a good game plan on that high press. Unfortunately, it broke down pretty quickly. The goal from Alonso, though, got Barcelona off on the right foot, coming early in the second half off a corner. Sancho misses on one end, then Alonso just 1v1 rises up at the back post over Fred and Wan-Bissaka with a good delivery by Rafinha. And saying that it's nice to see Alonso dedicate the goal to his dad doesn't take anything away from the hot and cold, very much like Alba, performance that Alonso had today. Without Alonso and Christensen to start this match, there's almost no doubt that I think this ends 2-1. But because Alonso was on the field, well, we immediately saw the hot and the cold that is Marcos Alonso. Then it's 1-1 because less than 2 minutes later, Rashford goes from left to right across the back line and gets goal side of Alonso. It wasn't necessarily just on him because, as I had mentioned earlier, Ter Stegen should have stopped this at his near post. Too tight of an angle for a goalkeeper not to get that. But it is, as I had mentioned to Ter Stegen, hard over the course of a season to fault him for missing just this one. For Alonso, we've consistently seen attackers get by him in 1v1 situations like Rashford did to have just a little bit of good movement from left to right, and Alonso's kind of beat for pace. And when that's happening, you put that on the manager. But in the nature of this, Alonso gives up that goal. 2 minutes later, Manchester United could have gone up 2-1, but Alonso winds up blocking the shot. But that only lasted for a few moments because right after that, it winds up being 2-1 for Manchester United, less than 5 minutes after that even. Rashford wins a corner, skates by Rafinha, and Bruno Fernandes keeps it alive. Koundé's own goal with pressure from Casemiro. And at that point in the match, I took that big breath and said, geez, La Liga feels like one thing, and it feels like a truncated 90 minutes. Okay, a draw is always possible. That makes sense. But in Europe, it just always feels like these matches are 9 hours long. Like there are so many roller coasters and ebbs and flows. And the same thing went here, where even when it was 2-1, I think in the past I would have felt like that's how this is going to end. But I don't know. There was something about how funky this game was, how up and down, where there was a little bit of belief in me, which does take us to our fifth headline. Because 5 is not so simple. I could have told you that before this match. Well, I did. And then I tell you after this that Culés and Red Devil fans alike both feel the same way. That this draw feels like a loss because of how up and down this game was. I mentioned the Sancho earlier miss. Lewandowski had his chances. Players on both teams should have put this one away for their side, and they weren't able to. And that's why I go back to the fact that this match, as much as people say it was fun, it wasn't the cleanest match. It was sloppy and chaotic on both ends. It seemed like the goals were created by mistakes, and actually the 2-2 for Rafinha's goal is kind of the same thing. Maybe, a little fluky, honestly. The 76th minute, Barca felt like they were on the back foot, but Rafinha delivered it in, and somehow Lewandowski and Varane neither touch it, and it goes in for the goal. And it does make you wonder why Xavi maybe didn't make his subs earlier. Because Barcelona, after those subs came in the 67th minute, when the players that probably should have started this game, in Christensen, Balde, and Ansu Fati, well, I don't know about Ansu Fati, but at least in this game, he did look like he deserved a start. So those three come on for Alba, for Alonso, and Kessie, and things kind of did change for Barcelona, and they pushed the high pressure that kind of wilted with those 2 goals from Manchester United was back and working hard, and they were able to create chances there in the final 30 minutes. I also did find it quite interesting, too, that before this match, both of these coaches said that this tie would be decided in Manchester. And I know that they didn't handshake on it or agree that this result was going to end in a draw or something like that, but it was really telling that both of these managers felt like neither team was going to be able to put the other side away in the first leg here. And the final not-so-simple thing is the way we talk about VAR and penalties and injustice in Europe against Barcelona. Trust me, my guest, as you know him well, that's going to be on the show tomorrow, is going to talk a little bit about that VAR and that injustice. But it continues, and it's this weird thing where I say, well, once the referee kind of makes that decision, it is a decision. You have to trust the VAR a little bit, and Barcelona should be winning outside of needing VAR help. But in the same respect, it is truly frustrating when you look at that Fred potential handball that does decide ties. And if Manchester United get that call in the second leg that Barcelona didn't get in this first leg, and that's what decides it for the Red Devils because they're at home and it seems like Barcelona can't get a call like the Camp Nou, well, then Culés are certainly going to feel aggrieved, and it's going to be fair for them to feel that way. Because that handball was just so close. From the angle, it looked like the upper arm so far where it may be the shoulder, because this freeze frame doesn't really truly do it justice. It seemed like the contact happened higher, but the arm is also away from the body, which should be enough to overturn something like that. But I do want to compliment Barcelona just a bit, because right after that call, that aggrieved call didn't happen for them. They didn't get down about it. There was a free kick right after from that foul, hits the post, then De Gea saves Ansu's half volley that certainly could have found the back of the net. Barcelona were pushing and could have easily gotten a third goal there. But that feeling of it's Europe and we've been here before is not a feeling that Culés can shake. And the numbers and the players back it up too. Look at Koundé in the league and then look at him in Europe. Obviously, enough said about Alba, but even look at Lewandowski. For that back line, it's 7 goals in 21 games in the league, and it's 14 goals in 7 games in Europe. And even in Europe, it seems like everybody's getting hurt and nobody's getting hurt in Spain. And kind of contradicting an earlier point I made about La Liga and how I'm kind of defending the Spanish league a little bit, it is always concerning that there is such, seemingly for Barcelona, I don't know about Real Madrid, but such a jump for Barcelona to go from La Liga into Europe, where it just feels like an astronomical gap between those two different competitions when it really shouldn't. There should be a team that should be able to keep players healthy, regardless of the competition, and kind of just play it out the same way that they did, Spanish competition or not. And that unbelievable numerical gap is certainly something that we will talk about tomorrow on the podcast. So as always, until next time, I don't know, keep your heads up, Culés, about this one. There is still a return tie, and I know a lot of players are injured, especially Pedri, no Xavi. It doesn't look great, no Dembele, but there's always a little bit of hope, I think, when it comes to this kind of Barcelona team that have at least shown you something over the last 2 or 3 months that they're capable of anything. I was going to say something, but anything. So as always, until next time, Forza Barca.